Well, the first thing is I say you hear this word disruption. I don't think it occurs as a crisis. Obviously, if your business is in trouble, it is a crisis on a personal level. But I don't think at a societal level we have a crisis. We have disruption, and we're seeing a transformation.
Well, welcome, Neil.
Hello.
Nice to have you with me today.
It's a pleasure. Wow. Well, you've caught me out already with
Put you on the spot there.
I guess the reason I'm here talking to you is because we're in, first site in Colchester, and you heard about me through running a project, what I would call a social innovation project in Colchester called the South Lanes Project. So, if I that's kind of what I'm known for here. But I won't give you my whole career, but essentially I actually studied computer science back in the day. I spent the first half of my career very interested in how technology could, I think, enable and empower society to work better, and I was really interested in that. My first job was in the NHS, and it took me right through to the dot-com boom when I was probably quite idealistic about the democratization of content and all that. And then obviously what began to happen next wasn't quite what I'd hoped for. And I spent the next part of my career really working on organisations, how you make organisations work better. A lot of that was commercially. And about 2 years ago now, I published a book called The Participation Revolution, and that had been 5-6 years of research. And I was really interested in how and why the world seemed to be changing the way it was, and I had some ideas about that, and about how to thrive, I suppose, in this emerging new world order. And it looks like some of those predictions are pretty good, actually. So the things that I talked about seem to be some of them weren't, of course. So here I am now. I count myself now as I'm a writer and I'm a speaker, but really I'm very interested in how enterprise can make the world work better. Yeah.
And you're a business consultant by trade?
Trade's quite the right word, but more by accident. But yeah, that's I've fallen into that. I'm particularly interested in how organisations work and how to make them work better. And particularly, the economy we live in now, that means an awful lot of my work is commercial, which I have to say I quite enjoy.
And you've got quite a wide view on things, because obviously you come from the north, but also you've spent sort of quite a lot of time down in the south now as well.
Well, more than that, I come from the north. I spent time in the south, but I also spent 10 years in Australia and Southeast Asia, and I came back to the UK about 4 years ago. And I think particularly for me, spending time in East Asia gave me a very different view of the world. And I think it's really interesting, all the preoccupation in the West and not realising what's happening in Asia. So I found that quite fascinating, actually.
Can you tell us more about the Participation Revolution, this book that you wrote back in...
Well, it was published 2 years ago.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's around about 2001, when the dot-com crash happened, and I was wondering what to do with my life. We went from being a period of massive optimism. You remember the UK in the late 90s with Britpop and New Labour and all this. It's very exciting, thrilling time. And the internet happened, and then the 9/11 happened, and the dot-com crash happened, and we entered this quite dark period. And I was wondering what to do with myself, and I suppose my initial question was, how do we get that back again? And I was just interested in that. And then I started to see these new companies emerge, like, I can't remember the order now, but obviously it was Google first, and then there was, who came next, YouTube, and then there was Facebook probably. And I went, wow, it's incredible that these new organisations are emerging that just grow at an extraordinary rate of knots. So then I got interested in that, and I thought I was going to write about that. But then I realised they were more of a symptom of something, which is how the kind of world and the economy was changing, and that's what I really wrote about. The reason it's called the Participation Revolution is one of the central premises of the book. Is where the reason we're going through this very awkward time is we're moving from an economy that was essentially a consumer economy based on consumption to a participatory economy, where the businesses that are thriving are about enabling participation. One of the symptoms of that is what we hear about the gig economy, where someone like Uber doesn't have a product, but they enable other people to take part. So that's what the Participation Revolution is about. I'm interested always in the positive upside, which is how do we create participatory societies where everyone is involved and everyone has a stake.
Yeah. And I know you primarily through what's been called the South Lanes project.
Yes.
Here in Colchester. So actually, just while we're on that, because there is, without a doubt, a crisis in our high street at the moment.
Yes.
And we're seeing fewer independent shops. As I grew up in Colchester. So speaking from experience, when I was a kid, there would be a great deal of independent shops to choose from. There would also be this kind of different. There was a different kind of community spirit back then as well. When you found, you'd go into local shops, you would know the shopkeeper by name. They would recognise you. You'd be a regular, and all of that has sort of fallen away in quite a short span of time. So I was just looking at some of the stats, and it said a total of 8,000 stores and 85,000 jobs were lost in 2019 alone, and this is kind of set to continue. First of all, just before we get into the South Lanes project, what do you think are sort of the biggest issues concerning the high street, and the reason for this crisis?
Yeah, well, the first thing is I say you hear this word disruption. I don't think it occurs as a crisis. Obviously, if your business is in trouble, it is a crisis on a personal level. But I don't think at a societal level we have a crisis. We have disruption, and we're seeing a transformation. And transformations are, we always look at the upside, have a downside, right? So what's happening? And I think what we're seeing is essentially the end game of consumerism, in that if you go back to the start of why towns existed, and I think Colchester is particularly interesting because it really was the first British town, And what happened was that people created towns, usually actually around a river ford. Colchester was different, it was on a hill because it was a garrison. And people came together and started to commune. And where people started to commune, they started to sell things. So the selling thing was always a secondary issue. And market towns until not that long ago were places where people went. You went to hang out, you went to meet people, you went to exchange information. You talk about those old shops. It wasn't just that they were butchers and bakers. It were people you knew and they knew you. And then over the last 30 years, we've seen this kind of franchising and sort of stripping out of our town centres to be just boring flat-packed shops.
Yeah.
And I think we put up with that because we had no other choice. But now we have the internet, we do have another choice. And all shops have become is warehouses.
Yeah.
So why go there?
But that's the thing as well. You very much get that sense now when you go to shops that it's something that has to be done instead of something that you want to do. I've just phrased that a different way. So it used to be more of an experience to go shopping.
Yeah.
It used to be more enjoyable to go shopping, and now it seems to just sort of be this obstacle that has to be, it's something I can't get in line, like let's say a haircut or food or something like that. It's something you have to go and get yourself. It seems more of an obligation now than it does an actual,
Yeah, but I think this is where I'm interested in emergence, and things emerge slowly. So you look for what's beginning to show up, and the artisan coffee shop is a great example. There's still lots of coffee shops like Starbucks where essentially, you go in and you get, I'm not saying Starbucks are bad, but it's kind of about getting a lot of coffee in a paper cup, Whereas, suddenly you're seeing small coffee shops where the creation is important, where the quality is important, where the experience of being there is important, and they're beginning to show up all over the place, to some extent they get bad press, but if you look at something like the vaping shops, if you look at tattoo parlours, they're things that you can't do online, but they're service based. And you go along and you want someone that you kind of trust, maybe not in a vaping shop, but particularly a tattoo shop, someone who's got a craft. A lot of the barbers are like that as well. You're going in someone where there's a whole kind of cult of the haircut and all that, and then the beard, Yeah. And I think, more and more we're beginning to see the emergence of that where the idea of a shop isn't just to sell you a thing. Is that first of all it sells you a service, but more importantly is the experience that goes around that service.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to tell us a bit more about the South Lanes project now.
Yeah.
And how you see that as the kind of, maybe not solution, but a good way of adapting Colchester to this, like you said, this ever-changing, this transformation of the high street.
Yeah. Well, I think what I find fascinating is the way that all of our life has become part of, what essentially was the consumer society, right? Even when you look at the way hospitals talk and the way the public services talk, they talk about customers and they talk about, they work in a very business-like way. There's nothing wrong with that, but it means that we've often forgotten, what our society is for, which at the end of the day is human beings. If you talk to councillors, if you talk to Labour councillors, they will talk about things like footfalls. Footfall is a metric from the world of retailing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about footfall. It's about creating places people want to come, and the measurement is, do they have a good time? Do they kind of meet people? So I think what's gone missing is an understanding, first of all, of human beings, but more crucially of community, which is how human beings commune together. And that's that's really what we're looking for. Somewhere where we feel safe, somewhere where we identify, somewhere where we connect, somewhere where we can kind of hang out, So that thinking is missing, I'd say, in most, not all, but in a lot of councils, in a lot of councillors, and in a lot of, certainly in the business improvement districts, where obviously just the title tells you that they're interested in business, right? So that's what the South Lanes project was interested in. In terms of how I got there, I published my book. It was quite sort of successful in its own way. That got me invited to teach at Cambridge University Centre for Social Innovation, which was great. And I was pretty much challenged by the end of that, saying, have you ever done one of these projects yourself? And I went, well, actually, no, I haven't. I was living in Colchester. I've previously lived in Melbourne. I'd lived in Brighton, even Leeds, where there's lots of arcades. And as I walked through Colchester, I suddenly saw this opportunity. I thought, wow, there's this atrium of streets that could come together to become a thing, become a place, And so I started to think about the South Lanes project. The thinking behind it, it's a term that's become quite vogue, I suppose. It's called placemaking. And the thinking behind that is if you're like, I don't know, Stratford-on-Avon or Bath or somewhere like that, you've got enough historical cachet that people want to go there on holiday, or there's a draw. But for most towns, you don't think, oh my God, I want to go and spend a weekend in Swindon. And however hard Swindon kind of probably is going to kind of market itself, that's probably not ever going to happen. But Swindon's got these amazing engine sheds, for instance. So trying to turn that into like a Victorian quarter. Now that suddenly becomes interesting. So that's the idea here, is to think about, probably, much as people love Colchester, people aren't going to be getting out of bed going, I'll go for a mini break in Colchester. Some people do. But they might go, the South Lanes, that sounds interesting. Yeah. So you create a sense of place. And that was the idea. Sense of place that's interesting, that's unusual. And it's ready-made in Colchester. About 95% of the businesses are independents. So that was the initial thinking. So.
Yeah, and also the structure, the layout of Colchester as well. So we've seen similar kind of setups in places like Brighton, I think in Camden as well. Can you tell us if this is actually, how do we know that this is the best thing to do?
Well, this is why I think it's a different mindset, which is why it's been difficult to work with, with the council and the business improvement district, because they tend to think very top down, about grand planning. When if you look at those, they're great examples. Camden Market started in a filthy old car park, which was successful, and it grew and it grew and grew, and eventually then Camden Block was developed, and 30, 40, however many years later, you've got this incredible place. The North Lane in Brighton was the same. You had an area that was called the Lanes, which are okay, and then you had this area above it, which was a bit derelict, where people started to open up indie shops, record shops, and then became the North Lane because it was north, and that now is the more fashionable area. So it's very ground up. So can you guarantee it works? Absolutely not. But the great thing about it is it's very low risk.
Well, that's certainly true as well. Especially so, one of the biggest sort of problems that a lot of businesses around here face is the longevity of, let's say, leases, business rates, things like that. And they had to do a lot of long-term, planning. They also had to ensure that it's, economically viable to have these places and then plan for a certain amount of time. Whereas you go to places like, so I went to university in Norwich. Norwich is a good example of their market, the way that works. So they have all these kind of stalls. Not sure if you're familiar with Norwich market.
Yeah, I did a lot of research.
Exactly.
It's obviously called the Lanes.
But another place, but another place I went to a couple of years ago now was Croydon. Yeah. So Croydon's interesting as well. The way that they've completely sort of gentrified the main area of Croydon. Which has its ups and downs. For example, I didn't find much green space in the area where I was in, but you find a lot of independent commerce, and especially the Box Park, the Croydon Box Park, which is known for. So, for anyone listening who isn't familiar with the Croydon Box Park, it's a big indoor kind of park with a big communal sort of dining area, seating space, but around it you've got pubs, you've got lots and lots of different pop-up food outlets. So you can, get whatever you want, jerk chicken in one, vegan kebabs in another. And I'm not sure exactly how long they last, but it's pop-up, so they'll only be there for a few months at a time. Maybe they'll go travelling. Some of these places have things like vans as well, so they'll do some stuff out there. But that seems to be a much better kind of model, because it seems to be there's not going to be any problem in supply of sort of little independent businesses. UK especially, we've got some of the most sort of startups and independent businesses, things like that. So that does seem like a more viable option. But why is it that we haven't really considered these things when it has worked in other areas?
Well, it needs a profound change of mindset, which is why I talk about participation. It's a participatory model rather than what's traditionally happened, whether the councils are Labour, Lib Dem or Tory, is they tend to operate in a very command and control kind of model, which is they feel like they're in charge. And actually councils are the last people that should be trying to work out how businesses should work. Their job is to enable, is to create the environment, to create the ecosystem. And I'm not seeing a lot of that. And Box Park is a great example, right? As far as I know, it started in Shoreditch with some boxes next, containers, shipping containers, next to Shoreditch Station, while Shoreditch Station was being built. And there's some derelict land there. And they created temporary pop-ups, and then of course they found out that they were more popular than a lot of the shops, so it became a permanent fixture. And now there's one in Croydon, and I think there's one in Wembley. And I think it's that idea. And Peckham Level is a great example where they've done it in a car park in Peckham. And I think it's that sort of idea of, rather than trying to do this grand planning, is you create a space, you provide some kind of conditions for it. You need to put kind of boundaries around it in terms of how leases work, and then you sort of allow it to organically grow.
Yeah. Absolutely, because again, we've seen this in a lot of different ways, not just in the high street, but this sort of move to regulate everything, and to really, like you said, control everything actually might be its downfall in many ways. Because I've spoken to a lot of people who have tried to set up independent businesses here. They've been forced to close down. They're maybe still making payments on that. There are other people that are just not. There's no real incentive. Which is also another big problem. It's easier to open up a chain over here, for instance, than it is to open up a small independent.
And look, and I don't want to seem like I'm critical as well, because I think everyone's doing the best they can, and I think a lot of councils, the issue they have is they don't want to make mistakes, and everyone jumps on them. And you've only got to read the comments section on the Colchester Gazette to see that. Is that so they're very risk averse.
Yeah.
But the problem with innovation is you've got to take risks. So, it'll be like, well, what's the business model for that? You can't really do a business model for something that's never happened before. You've kind of got to give it a crack, and obviously create what you think might happen. And then you sort of manage that risk. And I think that's a very alien mindset, to give something a go and it will succeed or it won't succeed. I have to say, in Essex, though, I think what's happening down in Chelmsford is quite interesting. I think the Chelmsford city status has definitely emboldened them. And some of the ideas they've got down there, so some of the employment that people have actually put in place on the councils is beginning to have a real impact in terms of pop-ups and markets. Yeah. I'm quite excited about that.
And we've seen similar things in other places like York, especially where I think the strategy is to try to give sort of cash injections to more independent firms to incentivize them to and just see what works and see what doesn't.
Yeah.
But I wonder who the onus is on to, is the onus more on, let's say, councils, local councils like that, the people who set, business rates and rents and terms, or is the onus more on businesses themselves to adapt to this, to, like you said, it's more of a participation thing now than it is just a product, because that's the thing about online, obviously. So we've seen over the last 10 years the rise in Amazon, in all of these online places, and to all intents and purposes, they're just getting more popular. Whereas, the high street is getting less popular. So is the onus more on business owners now to, actually adapt for this transformation, because it's inevitable?
Well, it is, and they are doing. That's the thing. The media particularly likes to kind of look at what's going wrong, and I think the traditional stores, as I said, if you look at a traditional store, if you go into Marks and Spencer's, you go into Debenhams, they are boxes full of stuff, and one of their solutions is to pack more and more stuff in there. And they're just not pleasant places to hang out. Now, once upon a time, you put up with that, But if you can just kind of like, click and collect, or don't even forget click and collect, get stuff sent to you, Amazon Prime overnight, why would you do that? Well, you want something that's a little bit different. And I think any business finds it hard to let go of something that's been successful for a very, very long time. But for instance, if you go to Stratford, IKEA have got an interesting concept store there. It's a prototype, not concept, where you can't actually buy anything. When I say you can't buy anything, you can't take anything out of the store. It's about 1/10 of the size of a normal IKEA store. It's all kind of set up to be like rooms. And you go and hang out in them, you sit and you think, they'd kind of be nice. And then you go onto an iPad and you select what you want and the colour you want, and then it gets delivered to your home. Now, if you start to think about that, with Amazon Prime and those kind of fast delivery services, we're getting to a point where you could go shopping, if that's the right word, choose something, not have to get on the train with 100 bags, get home and it will be delivered. So then the store becomes a lot more experiential, a lot more about experiencing it. That word gets kind of overused. What does that mean? It's pleasant, it's nice, it's interesting, and then you press a few buttons and then the thing turns up, and a lot less about racks and racks of products. And I think, we're seeing a lot of innovation around that at the moment.
But that's generally the thing, isn't it, about like accessibility and convenience. So I could, have to go into 5 or 6 different shops right now to get, different products. But then online, it's literally all there at the click of a fingertips.
Yeah.
Now, there are some exceptions to that. So, for instance, I had a friend recently who ordered, I think, a skirt and said it was literally like £30 in a shop and something like £5 online. But then the downside is that you don't get to try it on. You don't see if it's the right size or whether it actually looks good on you. And then you have, I think that's also why we've seen an influx in businesses like barbers, like eateries, like salons, especially because again, these are all things where you can research online, and there's plenty of stuff on there to, about what you should be buying and things like that. But then you have to essentially go in to you can't get a haircut online.
Yeah,
and you can't.
And look, one day you might be able to. I don't know. I mean, certainly, I'm really seeing in some of the robotics that I've been seeing around medicine. You can now surgeons can actually do a complex operation at distance, where a robot is doing it, but the surgeon 2,000 miles away is kind of running it, right? And that's now possible. That's happening. So if you can do that with surgery, you can do it with a haircut, but maybe. But the point of that is, you don't just go for a haircut. Well, some people do, but you don't just go for a haircut. You go usually because you want to end up, have a chat with a hairdresser. Yeah. It smells nice in there. You get your hair done. You maybe get a kind of head massage. So I think that's the way to think, rather than just the actual transaction itself. Yeah. Is everything that makes life pleasant and interesting in terms of human connection and human contact.
No, especially so like another place is a good example of this. So I. Even though I'm born and bred in Colchester, I spent a lot of my childhood in Wales. And there's a place in Wales called Welshpool, which is
well named.
Very well named. But what Welshpool is very well known for is its indoor markets.
Right.
And so you literally go in, and the thing I like about the Welshpool markets, I mean, we're talking there about haircuts. You say, you want to go in, you want a chin wag, and you want this. I personally don't. I think I'm just a different kind of person when it comes to haircuts.
Yeah, but you might not be for music,
So exactly. Yeah. But when I go to like Welshpool, for example, if I go into the indoor markets, and I went there a few years ago, I hadn't been since I was a kid, but it was very much still the same kind of feel that you get from it. Like you go in, and the thing I really like about them that online doesn't have is character, not just in the vendors and the people running the place, but just how things are laid out. You go into it'll be half a dozen used bookstalls, but the books will sort of be piled right to the ceiling. There'll be 10-foot stacks of books, and there'll be all kinds of different editions, all kinds of different stories. And I have discovered books, because I'm quite a fervent reader in my spare time. I love going to some of the independent shops in town that do second-hand books, because you can get a good price, but also you have that added gratification of helping out a small business. But that's what I like about it. It's I've discovered things whilst in shops that I haven't really discovered when, let's say, browsing on Amazon, stuff like that. So for me personally, it's very much in the character of the shops and the atmosphere that you get when you go inside them. But like I've just said about the haircuts thing, we're all very different shoppers, I'm assuming. So maybe it's that kind of thing that it'll work for some, but it won't work for others.
Yeah, look, I suppose what you're really asking me is what's my grand plan for Colchester as an outsider?
Yeah.
And I think, in my book, I think it's the opening quote, or one of the opening quotes, is you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf, which is from a guy called John Kabat-Zinn, who was a mindfulness meditation guy. In fact, he codified mindfulness meditation. And I think that's the place to look, is we can't stop the waves of change that are happening. We're not going to stop e-commerce. We're not going to stop digitisation. We're not going to stop the changes in our society around not just an interest, but a real need for sustainability and just to think about the climate and how we impact the climate. And obviously commerce has a huge part of that, not just from the creation of products, but the shipping of products. So there's these sort of powers that are happening which we're not going to be able to stop. And then the question is, and then in Essex, you've got this sort of more local version of more houses being built here than anywhere else in the country. Colchester, the fastest growing town in the United Kingdom, and the creation of obviously sort of almost a new town at Tollgate and a new town on the north side. That's just going to happen. There's going to be cinemas opening up at both those places. They're essentially shopping centres with a big car park that's free. So that's just going to happen. There's no point in trying to stop that happening. So the question is, what do you do around the town centre? Inevitably, if people are driving out to Tollgate to go to the cinema, they're not coming into Colchester. You can't be in two places at once, all right? So I think the key to that is you don't solve the problem often by focusing on the problem. And I think what we need to see in the middle of town centres is actually more people, because people have money. So getting people in to live and getting people into work. And then you get the kind of circular economy where, because you come out at lunchtime and you go to the shop to buy your sandwiches, you go and have a drink after work, and I think that's really the place to think with Colchester, actually, rather than more independent shops, is more independent living.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I wanted to touch upon was the After Dark project as well. Yes. So do you want to tell us a bit more about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's connected with what we were just talking about. What we were interested in was essentially, how do you get more people in? And again, you've just got to change that mentality from trying to drag people in to sell them things. We're like, how do we create a place that people actually want to hang out? One of the challenges, and another thing a lot of people don't do, we found it fascinating. We took councillors around and people from the council who'd never been down the South Lanes at night. And they go, oh wow, this is amazing. So you walk down there and it's dark. Literally, there's not much lighting. There's no CCTV. It can go from being quite a pleasant area to quite a scary area. Yeah. And I was sort of lucky in that I do yoga at the tree room, and I come out at 9 o'clock at night in winter, and I walk across Abbey Fields. And I'm fair. I've lived in big cities, and I still often would feel quite nervous. And I'm like, well, no wonder if you're a mother with children, you don't want to do this. So how do you bring the area to life? And it's a real chicken and egg. One of the safest places is a place for people in. So how do we do that? So we started to think about that by running events where we did get shops to put on events, to open late, to try and coordinate that, to put on bands in the streets. And it was difficult, to be honest. It really was. There was a real sort of cynicism from a lot of local people about that. So our big ideas didn't work very well. So then we went kind of micro. And then the idea was, how could you start to put on events? And this was the After Dark concept, which is particularly run by one of our very active participant in the South Lanes project called Amelia, who was a film buff. And she started to get films in and show them in places late at night. So, 20, 30 people would go into a cafe that would normally be shut. They'd watch a movie, they'd talk, they'd buy coffee. There'd obviously be a light, there'd be people in the street. And I think that's the kind of way forward, I think. So if everyone does that, if 20 stores do that, suddenly the place is alive.
I don't suppose you're involved at all with what's going on with Mark Titchener at the moment, because he's been putting up artworks in empty shops. Yeah,
I'm obviously a bit of a revolutionary. Nice try, but to me, that's I'm not going to say this. I'm sitting in First Sight. I know it's sponsored by First Sight, but that's a kind of top-down urban elitism that I hate, right? You take an artist from out of town, you don't involve any of the local people in the choice of him, you create these kind of very sterile artworks and you put them in the windows and then you ask people to participate. Why do that? Why not use local artists? There's hundreds of local people, and that's what we did. Create an open store, create a competition, you create a vibe, get 200 people involved, put some brilliant photographers, put photographs in all the place, involve the people.
But then they naturally come in themselves as well, and they bring people with them, because it's like, go and see my work at here.
And they post on social media, and
they bring their families from out of town and stuff like that, and they say, oh, well, we're showing some artwork now at the moment, and then they go in, and it has obviously a knock-on effect.
The participatory model, where we see what Mark's done. They put these things in the windows, these plastic things with his kind of slogans, which are kind of okay, but it's street art. And I don't know what you do with it. It's better than an empty window. It's better than looking into a shop which has just got empty fixtures and fittings in. But in terms of actually engaging the community, it's a fail. And that's kind of irritates me a lot. But it's all a work in progress. Having said that, and the point of me saying this isn't to criticise, it's to provoke. Hopefully, is that I think that First Sight itself is on the journey from being let's face it, a failing art gallery. It was about to close to an art gallery or to a community space that's shifting what it's about to participatory pursuits. You see the record market in here. You see the Syrian food when it's in here. You see the cafe. And all this kind of stuff. So I think in terms of what's possible, it's just to take that thinking, which is to engage the community, because that is actually what the community is. It's the community, rather than feeling you have to bring people from outside. I'm not from outside because I live here, and I've lived here for 4 years. So this idea that you've got to be from Colchester, but I think it's about people who live here, who pay their taxes here, who vote here, who shop here. That's what I mean. Not whether you're actually born in Colchester Hospital or not.
So it seems it's more on. Obviously, it's on us to the local people to contribute towards this, but it's also the onus is also on local councils to give them that chance.
Yeah, and cultures take time to change, and as I think there's been a lot of disappointment in Colchester, and I reckon it might go all the way back to, I think it's the 70s when Southway was created. There was this grand plan for Colchester, which is only half implemented, when a huge parts of the town were knocked down. If it hadn't been knocked down, we'd look like Saffron Walden. And since then, it feels like there's been a caution, and I can understand why. A lot of sort of timid projects. And of course, no one wants to be shouted at, no one wants to be criticised. So it's going to take an effort from everybody. When the council try and do things, they get a lot of criticism. So how do we do this? And there's a lovely phrase that I've really taken hold of, which is called urban acupuncture. And the idea is that it's like acupuncture. You look at the system and then you stick a needle in one place, is that you do something well somewhere. And that was another idea of the South Lanes, is do something well in a small area, and then if it succeeds, it can grow, So I think that could be interesting, is where is the opportunity in Colchester to do something really intriguing. And certainly, one place I've been making inquiries about is the old bus garage. You've got a huge space, not doing anything, with a roof on it, which essentially looks pretty like a market to me with no stalls in it. It could have a box park in there. There's all sorts of things that could happen in there. Now, if that could be opened up as something where there was short-term leases, there was all sorts of deals that allowed people who wouldn't normally create a business to come in, that could be really interesting, Yeah.
I guess time will tell on a lot of these things, and like you said, it's a case of seeing what works at different times, and
there's timing with it as well. And the coronavirus has come along at an awkward time for all of us on many levels, but at a local level in terms of the local election, because often when people get preoccupied with election, their main thing is not losing their seat, whereas after that election there might be an opportunity for some sort of more bolder thinking, I think. So I'm not sure when that's going to happen now.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of it's really presented a very, we're talking about sort of the local economy right now, but there's no guarantees for the wider economy at the moment as well. But this may sound like a sort of silly question, but just so we've got like a clear picture of things. Why is it so important to have a vibrant high street in a town?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to answer that, I think something I want to say about Colchester is such a wonderful town, in that it's oddly, because of its, not exactly its mediocrity, but what I mean is it's not a very rich area, but it's not a poor area, it's not a big town, it's not a small town, So in a way, it's a model town. It's a model for a town. And I think in an age where we're seeing, I mean, some of the statistics I find shocking, which is I'm going to do TED Talks in Colchester, and this is one of the things we're going to talk about, which is one man in the UK kills himself every two hours, and that suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 50.
Yeah.
And then you've got another statistic, which is 1 in 4 women between the ages of 50 and 25 self-harm. Now, why am I talking about that? It seems to be that we've created a society where a lot of people are feeling isolated, they're feeling lost, Those acts are acts of people who are obviously feeling desperate, And I think towns are our opportunity to go back to what they're actually about, which is somewhere where you can actually go and be. You can go and hang out, and you can go and connect, and you feel safe, and you feel nurtured, and you feel other human beings, where increasingly the rest of our society is becoming privatised. It's very difficult just to go and sit somewhere, and I think that's really what our town should be about.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned those statistics, because there is a lot of evidence to suggest that online and social media in particular has actually contributed to that.
Yeah.
People generally feel lonelier on social media, even when they're talking to tens of people, than you and I sitting right here now and having a conversation face to face. So it's one of those things. It's like it's for everyone's good, not just you've got the issue of the local economy, the local high street. You want a vibrant high street. You want to have something in your town where you walk through your town. It's just a pleasant to go through. But at the same time, it's also for people's for their own good, for their mental health, for their physical health, to be out in town and actually mingling with their community face to face and having actual experiences.
Yeah, if you think about it, what the businesses that are thriving, and there are a lot of businesses that are thriving, and the ones we've talked about, if you look at the top 10, it's gelato shops is in there, vaping, tattoos, nail parlours, hairdressers, those are the kind of things. And interestingly enough, there's a resurgence of record stores and bookstores.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. So like in Norwich as well.
Yeah, but the record stores and bookstores, they usually have a coffee shop in, they usually have a band, or if they're a bookshop, they have readings. They're not just, selling the product. Is what they all have in common is somewhere to sit. Mm-hmm. You can sit down with your haircut, you sit down while they have a cup of coffee, and it's not just sitting still, it's you're sitting in a public place. Whereas if you go into a store nowadays, the only place you really get to sit is outside the fitting rooms, and it's really uncomfortable, So being able to sit somewhere where you're not being hurried through and you're only there while you're a transaction, I think is really what our town's about.
So where do you see the future of the high street going? Especially not just in towns like Colchester, but across the UK as well, and maybe even further than that. Where do you see things going?
Yeah. Well, look, there's a bigger thing here about disparities of wealth, and obviously, what's so it's easy to talk idealistically, but where there isn't money in areas is going to be difficult, particularly if you go up to some of the towns where near where I'm from, and they're very desolate, and that's a bigger picture. That's about a lack of money, So I won't get into that, but I think that is an important issue. But in terms of what our town centres how they're going to transform, my guess is it'll have to get worse, because as far as I can see, the powers that be in any place generally only act when they're in trouble. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to see a lot more big stores fail. I don't want to pick on them, but I just can't see how Debenhams is viable as a business. I'm certainly not even sure in Colchester or Phoenix is viable as a business. I don't wish them badly at all, and I hope they can transform themselves, but I think you're going to see a lot of those businesses go, and then the money's going, the rates are going, and then that's going to wake people up. For me, a lot more mixed. Get people in, young people particularly. So what you're seeing is people wanting to live on their own more. When you're living on your own, you don't want to live out in a housing estate. Yeah. So actually bringing people into the middle of town where you can live on your own, you can walk to the corner shop, you can go to a bar. I think that's how our town centres need to kind of start to grow.
Yeah, I think you're already seeing some steps towards that. I mean, one thing that Colchester particularly focuses on is tourism and also student population.
Yeah.
Which is good in many ways because of the boost that they give to the local economy, things like that. So I know there's this very contested development going on. It's still an ongoing process, which is the alumni development next door. But the idea is, again, to have students living near the town centre. So they can sort of concentrate that boost of spending power in those places. Although, personally, I haven't seen much effort to roll that out across the whole town.
Yeah.
They seem to be relying very much on outside sources to try and boost their own economy.
Yeah, just in terms of that though, I think that's a really interesting example of where a participatory model hasn't existed. So you've got people, so some people going, we want to have this accommodation, and obviously at the moment it seems like the tide has turned saying we don't want this accommodation. I would say there's a number of things that were missing there, and the main thing was the involvement of the community in actually decision making. I reckon a lot of the upset about that isn't that they're putting accommodation or student accommodation there, it's that they're such horrible designs, you know. And I think if we had a lot more public consultation in that and people felt they owned the process, it might have turned out differently.
Well, this is the whole thing about, like, so Colchester, you know, for people who aren't aware of this, so Colchester is very historic town for a number of different reasons, not just, you know, where we're placed, you know, obviously good links to London and Norwich, the other side as well. But we're also in its history as well, because we've been, you know, conquered by the Romans, by the Normans, this kind of thing. But you've seen this repurposing of stuff over time, especially in Colchester. So we seem to have kept the best bits for ourselves. So also we've got the Victorian Park that we have in Colchester, where the castle is. The castle itself was formerly the Temple of Claudius back in the Roman times, and then interesting thing that the Normans did when they came in was they actually used a lot of the Roman brickwork that was left behind and repurposed it into other things. So they rebuilt it as now one of the largest Norman keeps, I think, in Britain. And we've also got like the walls and that kind of thing. We had the priory that was built by the Normans before it was sort of blown to bits during the English Civil War. But again, all of this was done by sort of repurposed older stuff that was already there and already very much part of the community that they and I think that's why you get sort of backlash against these things now, because they have these very modern designs which work in some areas. I know, for instance, I think it was in Norfolk, something like that they did sort of new accommodation, and it was really really acclaimed because it
won the, what is it, the Reba Award?
Yes, something like that. So again,
yeah.
Because it followed this kind of the same aesthetic as the other houses in there, so it fit really well in.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason why you're getting some of the backlash now, why this place got backlash first of all, why it was met with resistance, because whereas people want solutions to things, they're also very hesitant to change things. Yeah. I think that's why. So it's also about respecting the areas that you're working in as well. So it's you know, well and good that we're trying to revitalise the high street and that kind of thing, but at the same time, people don't want to see certain things sacrificed, which is the kind of town aesthetic or...
Yeah, look, you can't make all the people happy all the time, and I don't know about the world generally, but I think as human beings, but the British are very resistant to change. And then if you look at all the noise about the Olympics, right to the last minute, the whole country was about to fail. And then it was an amazing success. You know, so to some extent, you do have to drive things through. But I think getting public involved in the actual process, communicating with it, and getting involved is an important part. But the worst thing you want to do is go the other way and try and sort of please all the people. You know, designed by committee.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing I'd like is I think the other thing you can do is repurpose your narrative. So what I find fascinating in Colchester is the obsession with the Romans. Now, the Romans, in another narrative, were an invading force.
Yes, yeah.
Right? and the elephants that everyone talks about were the tanks of their time, right? Yeah. And I'd like to see Colchester seen as the start of the Me Too movement, because actually what happened in Castle Park is Boadicea came along and took the Romans to the sword because of her and her daughters being violated by them. I think it's a far more better narrative than the Romans coming in and taking over.
That's a weird testament to how we sort of treat invaders and that kind of thing. We seem to praise the Romans here, and then Boadicea or Boudica actually burnt Colchester to the ground, and we put up a statue of her.
Yes.
On North Station roundabout. So it's
well, you know, but was she doing that, or was she a freedom fighter, or was she a terrorist?
True.
You know, so it's that whole conversation.
It's the Mandela question.
Yes, exactly. Exactly, it is. You know, I like to see her as a freedom fighter. So I guess I'm talking to you still because you know, I found with the South Lanes project as we got to a point where we were put up for the Great British High Street Awards. You know, this had never happened in this town before. All run by the citizens, right? We looked for backing. We didn't get the backing. It was a shame because we were told that we had a shoe-in, not to win it, but we were in a box seat to kind of be considered. You know, and the town that did win it had backing and coordination from its council, a number of other, Chamber of Trade and things like that sort of thing. And it's a disappointment because, you know, I think otherwise we would have been in the national press kind of going, yay, you know, we got the support of the council and all that. So I'm really intrigued and I wouldn't say optimistic, but how we can start getting everyone in town working together rather than against each other. So I don't have a solution for that, but I think that is the solution.
It's the start
Yeah.
of a solution as well, yeah. And, you know, I wish you all the luck in that, especially as, you know, I'd love to see Colchester become, I don't want to say like it was when I was a kid, because I think when you apply nostalgia to things, you're ultimately setting yourself up for disappointment. It's not going to go back to the way it was. It's going to, you know, adapt and improve. But I think you're right, it's going to have to reach some kind of precipice of crisis, if you like, before people really have to, you know, pull the socks up. And, you know, especially the current climate, there's no real way of knowing how long that's going to take before we can really see sort of revitalisation of our high streets.
I would say one thing though, and this is my belief in creative destruction, and also because, you know, I'm now almost seeing something coming around, which is a sign you're getting old. You know, I was brought up in the 80s, and you know, when Thatcherism was happening, and anyone who wasn't an arch Thatcherite was talking about it being the end of the world. You know, some fairly brutal kind of, in this early Thatcherism, fairly brutal kind of government incentive decisions around, you know, the mining strike, things like that. But also, it was one of the most creative periods I've ever been involved in, because of course you always get a reaction. You know, and what excites me here is that you know, if you didn't have a problem, you wouldn't have mobilisation of particularly, you know, younger people around climate change, around everything. You know, and so in that respect, I'm actually quite thrilled by what's possible.
Neil Gibb, thank you very much for joining me.
All right, thank you for your time.
This has been great. Thanks very much, man.